Was Google Play Pass worth the wait?
And was the Twitter hack an inside job? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the weekly podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the tech news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined by Adam Turner, a man who's weirdly less locked down than he was in our last episode because he's now got the freedom of Melbourne rather than just select suburbs, but unlucky enough to get caught up in this week's great Twitter blue tick lockout. How good is partial freedom, Adam?
Well, look, the Melbourne lockdown broadening means I have access to more great cafes, which, as we know, is a key metric for any Melburnian's happiness. And of course, the ability to tweet is even more important. Losing that was bad, but getting that back and being happy about your blue tick, that's peak Melbourne.
We're also joined in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by Finder Editor-in-Chief Angus Kidman. Gus, how are you surviving the blue tick lockdown of 2020?
Well, I grew up in a rural area where you knew it was a really bad idea to get ticks, and this whole experience has just proved that.
And if something was dyed blue, you probably didn't want to eat or drink it either.
Absolutely.
So the big tech news this week was around severe compromise at Twitter, which we're going to dive into directly. But first, this week also saw Google finally bringing its subscription game and app service, Google Play Pass, to Australia. We caught up a little earlier in the week with Jason Murray from Osdroid to go through the fine details. So we're joined here in the virtual Vertical Hold studios by a very special guest. I'm talking, of course, of the one, the only Andy the Cat, but more importantly, Andy the Cat's owner, Jason Murray from Osdroid. Jason, how is Andy taking to you working from home so much?
Andy loves it, but he's not actually here at the moment. He's asleep on the couch.
So this week has seen Google finally bring Google Play Pass to Australia. So, Jason, for the folks listening at home, they're probably familiar with what Google Play is, but what's a Google Play Pass?
The Google Play Pass is the, let's say it's the Netflixization of your Google Play Store. Everyone's doing subscriptions because everyone wants to get a steady stream of revenue in, and this is Google's attempt to do the same. We saw Apple Arcade launch a few months ago, quite successfully, I think, as well. I know a few people who've jumped on that. And where Apple goes, Google also wants to go. So Google wants to collect a few dollars a month from you and give you access to, well, not everything, but a bunch of applications and games. Play Pass has been available overseas for quite some time, but we saw some hints of it arriving earlier this year in May, but nothing happened. And then just this morning, it suddenly sprang into life, and it was added as available on the Australian Play Store. So while it's actually been launched and there's promotional materials about there, you can't actually get it yet, but it's coming up later this week.
Yeah, so at the time of recording, we can't actually look at it to speak of. But as you say, I mean, it launched, I think, in the States in September last year. Do we have any idea why it's taken so long? Because that's a long time in internet years.
Not really. I could rattle off a bunch of reasons and possibilities off the top of my head. I don't know whether it's the same subscription, if it's the same number of apps that we get in Australia versus in the US. There could be regional differences. But Google loves to launch things first in the States and make us wait an inordinate amount of time. I mean, we just got Pixel Buds this week in Australia as well. So
Jason, from what we know about it so far, who is this aimed at? Is it serious gamers, casual gamers, parents? Who's likely to get the value for money out of this?
I think you're probably looking at casual gamers. There's games on here. So Google Play Pass games don't have any in-app purchases, so essentially they're completely unlocked. That's not going to work for a lot of the really serious online games where they really want you to subscribe for a monthly rate or purchase loot boxes or anything like that. So I think it's really aimed at people who want to download a game and play it without being bothered to purchase anything additional and maybe finish the game, and possibly at parents who want to be able to install games on their kids' devices without them triggering the in-app purchase monster. Google Play Pass is compatible with Google Play Family subscription. So if you're a family manager, you can add Play Pass, and the Play Pass games can go out to the other members of your family. So looking at the games, there's things like Sonic the Hedgehog, things like Monument Valley. And there's a bunch of old games and a bunch of new games, but I do feel like it's mostly oriented game-wise towards casual gaming. There's a couple of apps in there as well, but not a lot yet.
That app difference, though, that is a point of difference to Apple Arcade, because Apple Arcade is, hey, we're just games, whereas Google, from the get-go, from last September, kind of said, this is apps and games. Do we know if they've done in the States much to kind of freshen up that content list? Because looking at their release on that this morning, there were a lot of titles there that I know were on Google Play Pass last September.
A lot of Google's pages are somewhat geo-restricted for this kind of thing, so it's hard to see a list of what's changed or what's come onto the service. I am also quite interested to know how often the game list changes, because I see a couple of games on there that I've purchased years ago, and I don't really feel the need to purchase them again.
You're not purchasing them, though, technically speaking. You're subscribing to get them.
Sure.
But that does bring up that other weird little thing with this compared to, the established model, which is Apple Arcade. And obviously, you can't do Apple Arcade on an Android device, and you can't.
It's really hard.
You can't do Play Pass on an iPhone either, of course. But the reality is the apps in Play Pass are also still available to buy. They're not actually locked behind a fence the way they are with Apple Arcade.
Yeah, so you can still purchase these apps, but the versions of them that are available in Play Pass, they don't have in-app purchases, and all the content is unlocked. Or so they say. I haven't got all of these apps to try.
So, looking at the example of what Apple's done and also what we might have seen of Google in the US, once an app is in there, does it tend to stay there, or is it like the Netflix library where things come and go each month? Because would think it would suck if you liked the game and then it disappeared, or you're relying on an app and then it was suddenly no longer part of it.
I imagine because the age of some of the games, I think some of the games are quite long in the tooth. I suspect once they're in, they might not go anywhere.
I guess the thing again, though, is because they're purchasable, if you liked a game and it went out of Play Pass, you could at least go, right, well, I think it's worth it. I'll pay the actual money to actually own it.
But then you'd be worried, what if it comes back into Play Pass again? Like, I'd be a bit worried about things going in and out. Why would you want to hand over money when there's that risk that maybe they're just having an argument with the developer and then it'll pop up again?
Jason, do we know if it works across? I mean, obviously, the big play for this is for your Android phone, but do we know if it works across other Android devices? Because Android's an awful lot more than phones.
Oh, so I imagine it's really targeted at phones and tablets, whichever Android tablets are sort of still out there. Not really sure how it would deal with Chromebooks, because Chromebooks can, of course, download apps from Google Play. But I would imagine that if there's an application that already works on those devices, I don't see any reason why the Play Pass version wouldn't work as well.
What about Android TV? Because I know, well, a lot of the Android TV apps, the entertainment apps would be free, things like Netflix and Stan and Disney, whatever. But there are also some, I think, games in there that are optimized for the screen. Is it likely that when you buy a game if you buy an Android game, do you automatically get the Android TV version, or is it a totally separate beast?
If you're going to play a game on Android TV, you're probably playing it with a Bluetooth controller, which my thoughts would immediately go to, say, Sonic the Hedgehog and maybe Stardew Valley. No word whether or not there's a specific build of those games for Android TV. It's probably something to put to the developers and maybe Google themselves and just say, look, is the Google Play Pass going to give me access to a bunch of games that I didn't have on my Android TV?
It's probably a good idea that they don't come to Android Auto, though.
I suspect they may be blocked from Android Auto.
Everyone wants to play Sonic the Hedgehog while driving. Come on, man. Don't be a wuss.
Only if it comes with the crazy 3D bonus levels. That would be great while driving down George Street. I don't drive, so I've just randomly had to name a street in Sydney. Sorry.
Pick the worst street in Sydney.
I did.
I mean, no, you'd never want to drive in Sydney full stop, but even then, George Street is the street you would choose last.
Now, Mr. Hook turns. So, Jason, They want $7.99 a month or $49.99 a year, which basically matches what you pay for Apple Arcade. I'm sure that's not coincidental.
I suspect not.
Do you see yourself laying money down for Google Play Pass as someone who, probably has more Google running through his veins than is medically sensible?
I have actually been pondering this question all day, and I think for me the answer is yes. But I will temper that answer by, first of all, explaining I am extremely unadventurous when it comes to applications and games. I've come from playing only Ingress and Pokemon Go for several years, and I don't really play either of them anymore. So I don't really play that many games, but I could see myself subscribing to a service like this, especially if it's $50 a year. Then so be it. Like you could spend $50 on a night going out very easily. And if it's $50 for a year, you get access to a few games. Some of them are probably likely to be quite fun. I could certainly see myself going for it.
What do you think of the big things that are missing? Like, this is the beginning. How do you think that this could evolve, and what would you like to see it do in the future?
It's a really interesting question. There's some obvious gaps in here. So there's Sonic the Hedgehog Classic. What about all the other Sonic the Hedgehog games that have been released on Android? There's Monument Valley 2, but there's no Monument Valley. It feels almost as if Google's testing the water with these developers and these publishers to see whether they're willing to contribute more applications into the ecosystem as well.
Google is Google, and Google loves killing products, and we're kind of seeing the slow, lingering death of Google Stadia at the moment, which of course we don't have here yet. And given the way it's gone, and given Google seemed to have that same kind of attitude you were talking about there, Jason, with, oh, look, we'll wait and see if the devs get on board with it.
Yeah, the touch of
I'm
death.
That's Google's approach to everything. Come on.
Yeah, but when I'm giving them $50 for a year, if in 6 months' time they go, oh, yeah, look, this just didn't work the way we wanted to, let's send it where we sent Google Wave.
Oh, everyone has to get over the Google Wave.
but seriously, if you spend
if you want to get sympathy from me, it has to be Google Reader.
Yeah.
Oh, we all miss Google Reader.
Yeah.
We all miss Google Reader. But it's a bit different, though, for those products, which were essentially data mining of us, and that's what we paid, and something like this where we're actually paying a sum of money, potentially for a year or for a month, and maybe not getting it down the track because Google wasn't that invested in it in the first place.
I think you need to look at the list of apps and games here and wonder whether or not that really does demonstrate significant investment in the service, or if it's a building block of things to come. There's every possibility that the service might be killed or withdrawn. I would say that if it does go away, they would probably give you a refund commensurate to the amount remaining on your subscription time. But I think it's a legitimate question. But I think Google Play is a fairly solid foundation for a service like this. It's one of Google's biggest and most popular services, and so I don't see them necessarily taking it away. Rather, I think if it struggles to get off the ground, I think they're probably more likely to throw more money at it.
Okay, so we're going to have to wait and see how Play Pass rolls out. They are doing I think it's a month's trial, Jason.
Actually, I missed the month's trial in the press release this morning. I was ready to just go and sign up for the $50. Like I said, it's money that I'm willing to put down on the experiment for a year.
Fair enough. Well, we might just check back in with you in a year's time to see how you did. Thanks so much for your time, Jason.
No worries. It's a pleasure being here.
The big news story that's kind of emerged late in the week, which is Twitter. So for a lot of Australians waking up on Thursday morning, they may have been told by, say, Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Apple or even Twitter support that there was a great Bitcoin opportunity. But it wasn't that great, was it, Gus?
It was not great at all because it was a scam. It promised that it would double the amount of Bitcoin if you sent it in. And of course, the reality was you sent in your Bitcoin. And once you send Bitcoin, you ain't getting it back.
That wasn't real? Oh, I need to call my accountant. I'll be right back.
This feels like the simplest of possible scams, though. Like, if you can hack Twitter, how do you not only come up with a look, please just send me free money scam?
Yeah, and not only that, a scam where you use the same text on every single message, so that when Twitter tries to shut it down, they've just got to search for that text. Like, there was no diversity here. There were no bots here. as a result, there were probably no Russians here.
But they were smart in that they said it was a limited time offer. Like I saw the Bill Gates one and it said, if you send me money within the next 30 minutes or something like that. So they wanted people to instantly go, don't think, just send.
Well, you're not going to send it to Bill Gates because he's using it to fund all those 5G chips that are taking your life over.
Oh, don't even. It's him and Soros ruling the world and the whole 5G thing. Yeah, I know. I've got to hang on. I've got a tinfoil hat around here somewhere.
I mean, the reporting though is that then the account, because it was send Bitcoin to this address, and that can be tracked and looked at, but it can't be reversed. The whole point is once, as you said,
Yeah.
Gus, once you send it, it's gone. They made something like 169 grand, which is not to be sniffed at, but for hacking that many Prime accounts, like these were very big name accounts. It kind of feels like small change to me.
Yes, it's not a successful scam if you measure it like that. Because if your aim was to do this, there were more subtle ways of doing it. There were ways you could have varied it. So it seems like they'd done a good job of the social engineering to get in there, but didn't really have a great vision of what they were going to do when they got the access.
Now, you mentioned social engineering. This seems to be the prevailing theory as to how it happened, because at first there was this kind of, oh, is it two-factor authentication? Have these people just been really stupid with their passwords because it turns out that Bill Gates' password is Microsoft or something? It wasn't that, though, because it was across multiple clients and web clients and all sorts of things. But there's this suggestion that there was some kind of inside access?
Yes, because we've seen some screenshots circulating that suggest that some people had access to Twitter admin panels, which you can only get hold of if you're actually working within Twitter. This is not stuff that the general public actually sees. So there's a feeling that what happened is that somehow, and the statement from Twitter appears to confirm that line of thinking and saying that somebody engineered inappropriate access. So it was very much about someone managed to work out a way of spoofing their way in, tied in with a common thinking at the moment, which is that remote access to all these things has made it a bit easier to hack into them because some of that enterprise level, you're not in the building, security has disappeared.
Other reports were different, though. Other reports are saying it wasn't a phishing attack, but it was a willing insider who helped them. So it was an inside job. I don't know whether they bribed someone or how they went about it, but someone actually gave them the keys.
Yes,
to
and it's hard to tell.
tools.
Both these scenarios could be somewhat true. So it's very hard because you might be going multiple versions of it. And someone's gone, oh, great, I've hacked in. Someone else has managed to send that version of the, hey, we managed to film you on your webcam message. So it's going to be a while before we know for sure, but all the indications certainly suggest it was not the case of necessary hacking, effectively hacking all those things, but someone had some level of internal access.
And Twitter's response to this was kind of interesting. And I'm the only person in the virtual Vertical Hold studios who wasn't affected by this. What did they do, Gus?
So after sort of freaking out and saying, hey, we're looking into this, as a precaution, because so many high-profile accounts were being targeted, they switched off the ability to tweet for anyone who has the blue tick. And the blue tick verify. It's a status marker into the Twitter community, but it says this person is definitely who they say they are. So most prominent politicians have it. I was going to say most prominent journalists have it, but that seems unfair when Alex doesn't have it.
Two out of three. Yeah, 2 out of 3 in this conversation.
I've been uncovered. I'm actually not me.
It was bound to come out sooner or later. So
he's the dog on the internet that you never know it's a dog. It's actually Alex. We finally found it.
Yeah. So the outcome was that if you were a blue tick person, you couldn't send any tweets. While they were investigating this, until they got it locked down, they just had you blocked. And you couldn't do, what would you normally do when something didn't work? You go on Twitter and whinge about it. You couldn't do that because there was no Twitter to
whinge
get
about it on Facebook. That's just terrible.
From what I could see and from what people were reporting, though, you could send direct messages, and I think you could retweet.
You could retweet without comment.
Yes.
You couldn't create any new content for the public. You could message individuals. You could retweet without comment. So you were looking for that comment that said, oh, no one can tweet. This is terrible.
So what you wanted is the kind of Twitter version of that, hostage demand letter made up of different tweets.
Yes. Read the initial letter of every one of these. So there was a period there. That wasn't good. That wasn't great for people like us. It was worse. In the US, there are a couple of places where there were like tornado warnings, and the official tornado warning services are verified, so they couldn't send out the messages.
Ooh,
that's not great, but it's also a message.
bad.
Don't rely on Twitter as your only bit of infrastructure to talk about disasters.
And that lasted for a reasonable number of hours before they seemed to get access back. Although, again, I've hit some reports where apparently if you're trying to tweet out, journalists trying to tweet out versions of their story about Twitter going down are being blocked from doing that as well.
But
Yeah, that's what Jen Dudley said. Jen Dudley Nicholson said that she was having trouble sending out tweets
Yeah, they
about
didn't
it.
like tweets about it. If you had those screenshots in there, they really weren't happy with that, and they would block those as sharing
Ah.
personally identifiable information.
What I find really interesting about this as well is that Twitter for the longest time has kind of said, oh, look, we can't control, objectionable speech and hate speech. We'll do sort of what we can, maybe about moderation, but not really. And yet, as soon as it becomes an internal matter, it's like, right, here's the ban hammer and here's the specific ban hammer for these things.
But that is a massive. There's a big difference between we can't control certain content and we can switch everybody off, which is effectively what they did. Like that. That's one big old ban hammer going down there.
All Money says that I bet you Trump was sitting there thinking this whole thing was a conspiracy against him to stop him
But he
tweeting.
couldn't tweet about that conspiracy at that point. It was interesting. Apparently, the consensus seems to be that Trump has an additional level of security on his account beyond what everyone else has, based on that incident that happened. It was either last year or the year before when an employee actually temporarily deactivated his account. So while he was blocked by the blue tick ban, apparently it would not have been possible to get to his account with the hack that was used to get to everybody else's.
I would have thought if you wanted to hack his
Okay.
account, though, it's much, much easier. All you really need to do is wait until it's afternoon nap time for Mr. President, grab his phone and go nuts.
And if you tweet something batshit crazy, who's going to notice?
It's like-
Well, yes, if that message had come out from the Trump account, it would have felt utterly credible, utterly plausible, and one of the
Totally,
better phrased sentences he's sent
checks
out in
out.
some time. But we digress.
So, Gus, presuming that this was an inside job or hack, we don't know yet. Is there much that kind of the everyday user, the listeners, can actually do in terms of securing their account? Are there things they should do anyway or could do?
There's nothing that you could have done beyond what was already in place. So you already want to have two-factor authentication in place. You already want to have a sensible password you don't use anywhere else. But in this case, because they were going in behind that infrastructure and could change things, there isn't anything much that anyone can do as an individual user that hadn't happened. In this case, there's very, very limited access, because it appeared that when this was going on, that in some cases the messages got deleted by Twitter support and then more got sent out. So they didn't have full control of those accounts for a while. So it's a bit distressing. But the reality is, in most of these cases, when there's a security breach, there's not much you can do. And if you've taken those basic sensible steps, you won't be any more vulnerable in that one account that's going on. But nothing's perfect. We know this about software. No software is totally secure. And this is a good demonstration of that fact.
But as you said earlier, it's also really highlights how we shouldn't be using social media as your only source for emergency services warnings for, bushfires, earthquakes, tornadoes, whatever. It's things like, AM radio and the ABC still have an important role to play in thinking, oh, nobody needs that when you've got Twitter. Well, this is exactly where it can all go wrong.
And I mean, certainly, and in that context, Facebook also realistically is the other place he's playing. But yes, it absolutely underscores that if you're reliant, and we've learned this time and again with social media platforms, if you're reliant on just one of them to do the crucial thing you need to do, you'll get in trouble. If you've built up a whole media business based on how Facebook shares your videos, you're going to get slapped in the face. So
I think you already have been.
Again and again.
And I suppose also, obviously, don't believe everything you see or read on social media.
Yeah.
Because the other reason that this kind of worked was because, they might not have made a whole ton of money, but they certainly conned a fair few people.
Yes, there were obviously enough people there. I mean, it does seem like, given the number of followers, it was a low total, but it just shows some people will fall for any scam that's out there.
You said, Gus, that this was kind of a low yield really for them, 160,000 for this level of attack. Putting your devil's advocate hat on, what would you do if you could take over all those accounts? What kind of thing would make it work? What's the big score for something like that, short of maybe starting a nuclear war?
Well, it's disruptive politics. For instance, we were joking earlier about the Gates 5G theory, but if you can create a tweet that actually came from the official Bill Gates account that people can say this was on the timeline, and he said, oh yeah, look, I'm fine with the idea that we're putting chips in things, you could cause a lot of dissension that goes on for a long, long time. And I think you could have much longer lasting effects by using those things, and perhaps being subtle enough that it took a while before people realized it happened. This was such an obvious attack, it got taken out quickly. If you'd had just a couple more hours to spread this dissent, you really could have done some more subtle but more dangerous things, I think.
And speaking of subtle, I would have thought the other obvious vector there is you don't necessarily go nuts posting a whole bunch of stuff. you go nuts with the access going through everyone's direct messages and working out, hey, has, this person been sending compromising photos, or are there bank details, or are there any kind of detail they wouldn't want out there for a little bit of tasty blackmail or leverage?
Absolutely. So it does feel like there wasn't, it's hard to work out how what the intent was here. And maybe it is a case of just getting lucky with the social engineering and then going, oh, I've got this. Oh, now what do I do with it? And not necessarily being able to do what you'd often do with those things, just go and sell access on, the dark web. But that would be hard to do in this case, I think.
Well, possibly, I suppose, and we just don't know enough about Twitter's internal tools. It may well be something where they realized we have access, but it will be obvious we're not the right people to have access in a very short span of time. So we have to make illegal hay while the sun shines.
Isn't Twitter's internal tool, Jack Dorsey?
It looks like that they did have full access, as you say. It wasn't just the ability to tweet, but to go through accounts, because it it looks like the attack was something to do with password resets, because they disabled the ability to reset your password at the same time as they lock down these blue tick accounts. So you're thinking, if password resets were the way people were getting in and somehow beating the extra security checks to do that, then they did have, as you say, full access to accounts. And yeah, I'd be going through Trump's DMs before I did anything else. I'd be looking for the pics that he sent to Putin.
I think, though, the reality is, because they had this internal access, the password reset lock, I don't think, is a question of the hackers blocking people out of their accounts. I think it's Twitter going, right, we need to make sure that nobody has their account compromised until we can research this. So what you do is you go, right, all the verified accounts can't basically do anything or anything of particular note. And that includes your password reset function, because obviously if the people who've gotten this internal access have, apart from sending out those messages, subtly changed, the email address or the recovery or the SMS or whatever for those accounts, you want to make sure that they're not also quietly, while you're busy fixing that fire, that they're not quietly taking over just a few accounts, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a big, ugly, unseemly mess. But at the end of the day, in a week's time, the people who want to use Twitter will be back to using Twitter, and life will go on as normal, because we've seen too many of these social media scandals to think that this makes any difference to the long-term way these platforms work, I would suggest.
I'm just disappointed that they didn't use their illicit power to bring back the fail whale.
The fail whale.
I think I've maybe been watching too many heist movies, because it just occurred to me that this whole thing may have been a cover for something else. This is the perfect cover if you're trying to pull one job, if you're trying to get into one person's account, if you did want to look at Trump's DMs, but then draw attention away from what you were doing and make everybody think it was a wide scale, totally different attack. This is the way you do it. If I was Twitter, I'd be going through the logs with a fine-tooth comb to see exactly who did what.
Okay, so I've just registered that plot with the Copyright Office so that you can't steal that when I sell that TV series they did on Netflix.
Well, that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Gus for once again joining us in the studio.
Happy to tick that box.
Now, presuming folks don't once again confuse the two of us, where can people find your work and social media online?
Well, they can find me online at finder.com.au, and I'm on Twitter most of the time at GusWorldAU.
And thanks also to Jason from Osdroid for his time as well. And of course, you can catch up with us on Twitter at VerticalHoldAU or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
Once again, thanks everyone for listening. Try and stay safe out there in the lockdown. We're on a big push this year to try and reach new people and pick up some new subscribers. So tell your friends, leave a review for us, and help us spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Did I just hear a cat?
Yes!
Oh my God.
We just looked at each other like, do we think that cat's audible? And then you confirmed that it 100% was.